Thank you, Bob. Hi, everybody. My grandson's talent show was not scheduled. The date was not firm until just about a week ago, so it's not, it's first come, first served. Anyway.
Can I stop you a minute?
Yes, I'm not doing things right. Well, it's not picking you up, so I don't know why. Oh. I should.
Okay, give me 1 second. This battery's going to.
Well, I could tell you, while she's doing that, why I signed up for Charles Lwanga. I have a very dear friend who lives her family lives in Chicago, and she was born and raised there. A family of 4 kids, and one of them went off to be a sister. She's a sister of mercy, and she's stationed in Chicago, or she was when I was hanging around with Patricia, my friend. Anyway, it was at the time, maybe, I don't know, it was around Vatican II a little bit. And they built a new school, an inner city school, and that was named for St. Charles Lwanga. And she was the principal. And she was a very kind of go-getter kind of a sister, and she just really was so happy and loved what she did. And so I had never heard of St. Charles Lwanga, and I always had been curious about him, but I never looked him up. God, my curiosity wasn't that bad, I guess. But anyway, when I saw him on the schedule, I thought, now I will look up Charles Lwanga. Anyway, I don't know, I guess I was supposed to introduce myself in the beginning. I am Mary Jo Asadorian. I officially am a nurse, but there she is. I thought she wasn't going to come. Anyhow, I've been an associate for 4 or 5 years. I don't remember that either. Remembering is getting to be an issue. So this is what I learned about Charles Lwanga. Charles and his family lived in a part of Africa that was called Buganda, and it was a section of what would be called Uganda, ultimately. The White Fathers, now I remember the White Fathers, or hearing about them, when I was in Peace Corps in Bolivia, and we often talked with the Marinollers who were stationed in our town about different orders of missionaries, and the White Fathers came up, and I really don't know, I think somewhere I read that they were really Franciscans, but they called them the White Fathers. I'm not sure of that because I couldn't go back and find that paragraph. Anyway, they had set up missions following the plan of St. Junipero Sierra in California. That meant that they set up missions near a center of population, and then followed with several outstations about 1 day's walk from the big mission in all different directions. Sometimes they would put some of the more well-trained local people in charge of these outstations. Charles first came in contact with Christ at one of these outstations, where he studied hard and learned the catechism well. The society in Lwanga was individual chiefs in different sections of the country. And the chiefs had the liberty to have a harem of women, and they also had what they called pages. Pages were young boys who it became an honor to be named a page, for a family to say their son was a page. However, they had homosexual relations with these little boys. And the White Fathers said, number one, you can't do that. That's a sin. And then they also told them, only one wife anymore is not right. And the kings were angry. They called the kings Kabaka. I spelled that wrong on here anyway. The Kabaka, K-A-B-A-K-A. And they held their temper for quite a while, the chiefs did. And then finally they got mad about something and they kicked the White Fathers out. But they only had to go across the river, so they didn't go far. But at one point, when Charles started to become involved, they had been kicked out for 3 years. And then finally they could come back. And when the White Fathers left, they had about 100 Christians there that were baptized. And then when they came back, there were 300 people already prepared for baptism by the local people that had studied a lot, and they knew all their prayers, and they loved their faith, and there were 300 of them. So when the priests left, there were only 100, but then there were 300, just because the community taught each other. One of the a requirement for baptism was 4 years of study. And that sounds like a lot. However, they had to translate their catechism into Burgundies, and then they had to teach the people to read. So it did take them quite a while to get where they felt the people knew enough to be baptized and to be a missionary, to work in these outstations and teach others. So they were happy that their plans grew threefold when they were away. But the fathers had told the Christians to pray every day, read the catechism again, and if possible on Sundays, to assemble and pray together. They were to teach the people that those who take the name of Christ must pray every day and instruct others in the way of Christ. So that worked pretty well. And then Charles was very handsome. He was about 25 when he became Christian. And he was strong, and he was very good looking, and he was very smart. So what he did was he taught the pages and any other Christian groups he could get together. He was very obedient and cheerful, and he loved being with the young boys, and he knew what was going on with the chief, and he taught the older pages to hide the younger boys, so that if the chief asked for a specific boy and they felt he was too young to handle himself, they hid him. They would say, no, he's been sent so-and-so, he's to such and such a place, and he can't get back here. So they tried to hide the kids. But one thing that Charles taught in his Christian teaching was that people needed to be extraordinarily kind to other people. And that was one thing that was aggravating to the kings. They never, ever would respond in anger to anyone. They would be very quiet spoken, and they would pray. And the praying was like a murmuring. And the boys prayed all the time, and they got to be called the praying ones, the whole group of pages and Charles. And they did get along quite well with the king. They made it work. However, there was also the little agitators, like the Pharisees, sort of. They kind of went around and talked to the king and said, they're getting to be so many Christians pretty soon, you won't be able to have your wives. It'll be outlawed in the country. Or you can't be with the little boys anymore, because that's their rule. Anyway, they just kept needling the chiefs over and over again. And so the chiefs were getting sort of edgy about Christians. There was also an Anglican mission, and several Anglican Christians in the area where Charles and the pages and the chiefs lived. And so after getting agitated one time, the chief called all the other chiefs together and then gathered all the pages and Charles and everybody into this big yard. And he said, let those who pray go over there at some spot in the grounds. And so Charles led them to the appointed spot, and the Anglicans did the same. And then the king's bodyguard goes over and stands with the pages. The king orders, tie them up, take them to Namrud, Congo. It was a place 17 miles away and has a hill that they used for execution. The executioners tied up the pages and all those who prayed. They tied them together so they could just barely walk. They were all smiling as they walked to their deaths, as they were looking forward to dying for God, and that they would be with him soon. Charles had taught them that dying for God is the best that they can do to show how they love him. There were about 30 people, Catholics and Anglicans, in the procession of 17 miles. When they arrived at, I can't say the word again, Namrud, the fire was not ready. There was still a lot of work to be done. So they took all the prisoners and put them in huts in small groups for about a week while they got the fire ready. But they could talk with each other, and they recalled the death and resurrection of Christ and his approaching ascension. They were cold at night and almost starving, but their joy was surpassed everything, and they did not stop praying the entire week. The Our Father and the Hail Mary were always on their lips. Then one night the prisoners heard constant drumming and mournful chants, so they knew that their execution would be the next morning, on the feast of the Ascension. Then as the prisoners were walking to their death, each one who was to die was tapped on the head by the chief executioner. He just had a reed or something. When he came to Charles, the executioner said, "This one is for me." So Charles knew that his death was going to be probably prolonged and quite a bit worse than others. He was tied to a low stake where his death would be very slow. Charles told the executioner, "You are burning me, but it is as if you were pouring water on my feet. Beware of the fire that lasts forever." The executioner just snickered. And Charles said, "How happy I would be if you too were to embrace the religion." And the man did become a catechumen 4 or 5 months later. Charles, the fire was going, and when it reached his breathing area, he said, "My God," and died. Then the remaining prisoners were brought to the place of execution. Each was rolled up in a reed mat and tightly bound. They were carried like living bundles of firewood onto the pyre. The fire was then lit in many places at the same time. There was heard a great murmuring. Great murmuring of prayer from the fire, and then suddenly only silence. They had all died together. Now there were a few who were spared death, and my source didn't seem to know why, but apparently I would think somebody bought their freedom, I don't know. But then there were some that had wanted to die with the others, but for unknown reasons were spared by the order of the chief. 22 Christians died that day, and they ranged in age from 13 to 29. Shortly after the execution, there were 500 Christians and 1,000 catechumens in the country. 20 years later, 100,000 Christians and 150,000 catechumens. In 1964, Uganda had 2 million Catholics, 3 major and 8 minor seminaries, 200 African priests, 20 brothers, and 1,000 sisters who are natives. Information on the internet now says that Uganda has an estimated population of 36 million people. Of that, 41% is Roman Catholic, 42% Protestant, of which 35% is Anglican, and 12% are estimated to be Muslims. There was not a great deal of stuff written about St. Charles Lwanga. And so the official books, I didn't find a lot of information, but I did find a couple of books that were written, I think, more for young people, maybe even children. And I think that's why all the detail in what actually happened, I can see me having kids understand more what happened if you explain to them just what happened to these young men. So that is what I know about Charles Lwanga. If anybody has anything to add that they know or any questions, we can try to answer them. But, so I guess it's open to questions.
What a witness.